It is a big one in the Big Ten. Mark Rogers TV breaking down Ohio State hosting Penn State on Saturday. It's a 4 o'clock Eastern game on Fox. We bring in Tony Gerdeman. He is a senior writer at the Ozone. Tony, how you doing?
Doing pretty good. A couple days away from the biggest game of the year for the Buckeyes.
Yes, this should be a good one. So for the longest time here since Oklahoma, the Buckeyes have been looking for redemption, and it's impossible to get it against the likes of Army, UNLV, and even some of the Big Ten teams that they've played to date. It seems like they've kind of gone up a ladder to a certain extent in terms of level of play, in terms of the opponents, but it's been a very gradual ladder. So it is going to take a huge jump from Nebraska to Penn State with a bye week in between. Your evaluation of Penn State as you've seen them this year, of course, we got our best look at them, of course, against Michigan, who has been considered a top 10 team most of the season. Maybe the Wolverines aren't that good. They're really good on defense, but maybe they're not elite, and maybe they were supposed to be decent on offense, and they're not decent on offense. So we'll see about Michigan later on, but I can't imagine they're any worse than like an 8-4 team. So Penn State dominates a Michigan team still with a lot of talent and ability and a solid defense, more than solid defense. So your thoughts about the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, I was impressed by what they did against Michigan. It was a Michigan offense, Michigan starting quarterback, but how good is Wilton Speight even? But the impressive part for me was just the way that Penn State put 500 yards of total offense on a Michigan defense that hasn't had that happen under Don Brown the last 2 years. So they usually hold opponents 200 yards below that. That's what they've done. That's who they are. So for Penn State to pretty much do whatever they wanted, I shouldn't say do whatever they wanted. They hit some big plays, and I think that really helped them in terms of, just building their confidence. Saquon Barkley started with that 69-yard touchdown run right out of the gate, and it seemed like from then on they felt like they could do whatever they could, even though Barkley was pretty much contained after that. But Penn State was still able to, do more than enough to get the win.
Tony, I think Penn State a bit has been inflated in regards to a ranking to date, even with a win against Michigan. So the schedule has not been difficult. They had a trip to Iowa. There were different thoughts about how good Iowa was at that point, certainly playing that well against Penn State, and really should have won the game, even though they got dominated in yardage. And statistically, Iowa was in position based on their play to date to get the job done, seal the win, and not allow McSorley to complete the pass to Juwan Johnson to pull off the victory for Penn State. But Iowa's lost since to Northwestern and Michigan State. Penn State, the one difference that I would say in Penn State taking on inferior foes versus previous seasons is that they put their foot on the throttle and they really crushed them, as opposed to just winning 31-14 against most of these MAC teams and some of the lesser teams in the Big Ten. Even Indiana, they did not struggle like Ohio State or Michigan. They have done what dominant teams are supposed to do.
Yeah, and they've looked good. Even the Iowa game, like you said, it was one of those scores that you have seen in the past, but the yardage was so outrageous, in Penn State's favor. So I do believe they're overrated at 2 right now, because like you said, where's the big win is against Michigan, who at this point it wasn't the same Michigan, earlier in the season, I think. But you can still be overrated at this point. There's no effect, down the road, because you're going to have Ohio State, you're going to have Michigan State, and you're going to have Wisconsin, so overrated or not, you'll eventually be rated properly once you get through these games and the committee gets a hold of you. They really have not played any type of offense, any significant offenses, and so I think what they have has been inflated, but that doesn't mean they're not good enough to win Saturday at all.
Tony Gerdeman joining us from the Ozone.net. Please join him right there for the very best in Ohio State football coverage, with the Buckeyes hosting Penn State, number 2 and number 6 getting together. And you speak of overrated, maybe the Buckeyes are overrated. So at a number 6 ranking for me, I don't think they're overrated in regards to talent. I think they're easily one of the 6 most talented teams in the country, and therefore potentially one of the handful of best teams in the country. But based on what they've thrown out there, for example, I think it's ridiculous that they're ranked ahead of Oklahoma. Same records. Oklahoma's beaten Texas. And of course, the head-to-head wasn't really that close in the second half. But that's not going to matter past Saturday. Either they're going to show up, prove it, and prove the ranking, or they'll drop back into the pack and have to play for a second-tier bowl bid, most likely for the rest of the season. So, yeah, the question awaits the Ohio State Buckeyes. They could have beaten the last 4 opponents or so 50-0 every week, which they practically did, and it wasn't going to prove anything. But if you can kind of sift through the Marylands and Rutgers and Nebraskas, do you like what you've seen in the last month?
Yeah, you have to like what you've seen. And, to talk about the opponents, I think the best win at this point might be Army, aside from the Indiana win. So it's not been this great, run, but they've done exactly what they needed to. They've looked more than competent, because even looking competent in the passing game was a struggle for them early on. And now they look really, really good. And they've never looked this good against the same schedule before. They play the schedule every year, basically. And they've never looked like this. So when they are looking like this, you sort of have to compare it to what they've done in the past and know that there is a difference. But yeah, as far as, they don't have the resume of what you'd want to see from the number 6 team. But with the win, yeah, it's a different offense in terms of, and this could be an hour conversation just in itself as far as what Kevin Wilson and Ryan Day have done and the process to turn this from this offense that we know to the flourishes and the tweaks that have made this a productive offense, because it didn't start in week 1. It's been a constant build each week where new stuff is added, but old stuff is then sort of mastered. So it's been like an inchworm effect. That you get one thing down, you add something else, and then you bring something up behind that you get better at. And right now, I mean, it's an offense that you're accustomed to seeing from Baylor under Art Briles. Not to go that direction, but just they can run, they can throw the ball, and right now they're too much for a bad schedule, which is, I guess, also like a Baylor.
Yeah, Tony, it's funny because few quarterbacks will play against an opponent twice, both home and away, during a career, 4 times, 2 home, 2 away. I was working on some posts the other day and was looking up pictures of JT Barrett playing playing Penn State. And I was getting a lot of the pictures from 2 times ago, the 2014 game in Happy Valley, not the game last year that they lost, but both games were similar in the sense that the Buckeyes were a heavy favorite. They broke out to a huge lead. They blew the lead. Well, of course, in 2014, fortunately for them, they hung on. They pulled it out in overtime and were the better team. And JT Barrett had a very marginal game in the passing game, but won the game with his legs. Then, of course, what happened last year with the blocked field goal, the blocked punt, and Ohio State doing next to nothing on offense in the second half with all the offensive line issues. JT Barrett's played in a lot of big games. The national narrative's not necessarily fair that he's lost big games or that they have to be Titanic games to register on the national radar. So it's, of course, well, he's the guy that got hurt before they won the national title. And really since then didn't get a chance because of the Michigan State loss to prove how good they were, even though he showed up against Michigan and Notre Dame to close out the season. And then, of course, last season, the Clemson loss is hanging around his neck. So he is seemingly improved in the past week, but it's, again, for a fifth-year senior, what are you going to do against Penn State? And his legacy is going to partially hang on this game.
Yeah, and the legacy sort of started with Penn State in 2014 because, as you said, he did not play well. But Urban Meyer looks back on that game because he won that game in overtime, double overtime with a sprained knee. So he was hurt, and he played through that, and he was running. And, he just lifted the team up and led them, and that's something that, Urban Meyer, he speaks of it in the same vein he speaks of Tim Tebow, in his speech after the Ole Miss loss and whatever year that was. So this is something that he always talks about. So, I mean, this is something that's where JT Barrett's legacy started. And you're right. Meyer has said that quarterbacks, he doesn't care about stats. He doesn't judge quarterbacks by stats. He judges them by, their wins, the trophies they hoist. And Barrett, the only trophies he's hoisted, that he's put up, been like the silver football, which is an individual award. And so he knows that Barrett's legacy is tied to championships. If he doesn't get that, be it a Big Ten championship, that's what they're shooting for. And then anything after that is a bonus. But if you don't have that, then you're just a guy who put up a bunch of stats. And, at Ohio State, sure, that's great. But it's not like there's a long line of quarterback history here to where, now you're better than Drew Brees. Well, maybe in the Big Ten you've put up some numbers, but they don't have that lineage at Ohio State and quarterback. So it'd be different to be maybe the best running back in Ohio State history and never have a national championship. But there are quarterbacks here, much worse quarterbacks, who have national titles. And so, he needs that trophy to sort of cement his legacy. And I asked Urban on Wednesday if it was fair to JT to call this the biggest game in his career. And he said it's not fair because he's had bigger games and he's played well against our rivals. That's what Urban Meyer calls Michigan, So he's played well in big games in the past, and to put this game above any others, he said what they talk about is, how often Penn State blitzes on first and second down, what coverages they're in when they do this. That's all they're talking about. They're not talking about, JT, you need this one for your belt. You've got a notch and it's empty, or, anything like that. They don't talk about that. They talk about, the X's and O's. And, maybe on Friday they'll talk about something else, but until they get the X's and O's down, there's nothing else to talk about for them.
Tony, as you know, it's become so cliche among successful coaches to say block out the noise that we almost get past that and don't listen to it. But it's entirely true. They focus on the process. What do we need to do to get better today? It's Monday. We're not going to worry about Friday and Saturday. We're going to worry about Monday, and then we'll get to Tuesday, and we worry about the process and what we can control, not what everybody's saying and what's going on outside the room. So that's the formula. That's a piece of the formula for guys like Urban Meyer. And I think a lot of that has rubbed off on JT Barrett. The other thing that Urban Meyer addressed the other day, Tony, was revenge. And he didn't shy away from it. Some coaches will just flat out say, there's no such thing as revenge. It's a new team, new year, completely different circumstances. Mm-hmm. He didn't embrace it. He didn't say, oh, we need revenge. But he basically said, it depends on the team, depends on the situation. Some have responded well to it. Others I've had have not. It's still the same team, and they came out and they beat our butts again the next year, whatever. That it depends, but he wasn't going to make a big deal out of it. And again, he was going to focus on the process of getting better throughout the week and getting ready for Saturday.
Yeah, and I believe the question was on Monday if revenge is a motivator, and I think his answer was hell yes. But like you said, it just depends on whether he's going to use it or not. And like Sunday through Thursday on X's and O's and this and that, and then Friday is sort of when the psychology switch goes on, and whatever if Meyer feels like sort of additional thing, which with 9 senior captains, and all these different seniors and veterans. This week, none of them have really talked about this being, revenge being a motivator. That's not something they've been talking about, but they are so well versed in speaking with the media that most of them would never, let you in on that. So, it's pretty much the same guys every week. They know the answers that they need to give. They know the questions they're going to get. And, even like senior Billy Price, the center, when you ask him something, he'll I know you're trying to get me to say something and I'm not going to say it. I'll say this instead. So, it's sort of a master class on how to deal with the media over there. And just to get back to canceling out the noise and JT Barrett, you got to remember, this is a guy who, a kid who grew up in a military family. So everything has always been regimented with him. And if it's not important, it's not, it goes by him. And I think that's, the outside noise, he is as good as you can get at ignoring it, but he hears so much of it. And every time he's talking to the media, he hears it. The last, 6 weeks when we've talked to him, why can't you do this? Why isn't this working? What about the deep pass? What about this? And then a couple weeks ago, he was asked about the deep pass again. He's like, I thought we were done with this. I thought we've moved past this. We've completed deep balls. We can do it. Why are we still talking about it? And on Monday, we talk to him every week, a couple times a week generally. And he'll sit and talk, 8 to 10 minutes. And then on Monday, after about 4 or 5 minutes, he's like, all right, I got to go do homework. And he left. I just think he's really ready to get this game played underway, because we've been talking about it for so long. Because every game after the Oklahoma game, when he throws for 300 or runs for 80 and puts up 6 touchdowns, every week it's, yeah, we'll see what happens against Penn State. That's the media, that's the fan base, that's everybody except for those inside the building. They all have faith in JT Barrett. I think most everybody else is waiting to buy in and sort of been pointing at this game to get that done.
Ohio State, Penn State should be a great one. First real Titanic battle in the Big Ten. We thought the first one was last week, and maybe it was, but Michigan not good enough in Happy Valley, 42-13. Tony, most likely it's the best defensive front in college football, talking Ohio State against what has been the biggest unit, the weakest unit, on the Penn State side for the last couple of years, despite the success. So I know in talking to some Penn State people last week, they talked about game planning for Michigan and trying to protect the offensive line. Of course, the offensive line always has to perform well, but there are certain things that you can do as a game planner to protect an offensive line. So it's strength versus weakness, although it's a developing unit for Penn State, and they are definitely better than they were last year and markedly better than 2 years ago. The thought would be for me that if the Penn State offensive line at least neutralizes Ohio State up front to a certain degree, or Trace McSorley pulls a Baker Mayfield and he's just running around in circles and nobody can catch him, and then he can make the kind of throws that Mayfield can on the run. And McSorley has to a certain extent. I don't think he's proven it to that extent. He threw up a lot of jump balls last year in a lot of the big games. But is this worst case scenario if Ohio State's defensive line doesn't play up to par, combined with McSorley and Penn State game planning to get the ball out of his hands quickly, to negate and compromise the rush, and then maybe Gesicki and Johnson and those guys, Deshaun Hamilton, are running free in the secondary?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, because we would agree that the Ohio State defensive line has the advantage over the Penn State offensive line. And if they don't take advantage of that advantage, then they've just lost, an area where they should win. So, if you look at the tail of the tape and you don't win the ones you should, it's going to be hard for you to get the win, the actual win. But, talking to the defensive line in the last couple of weeks, Ohio State rotates 6 defensive ends. So in an average game where you play 75 snaps, each of these guys is only playing 25 snaps. And so the last month, they've maybe played a game and a half of actual reps, over the last 4 games. So like Nick Bosa and Sam Hubbard are just dying to play more. They're not bored, but as close as you can get to being bored, so they're playing like 25 snaps a game, and they're ready for 50, they're ready for 60. And they're, fresh as can be. They're not tired. And we know that this is an offensive line for Penn State. It was one of the worst in the nation in terms of allowing tackles for loss. And you've got a 4-man defensive front who doesn't need necessarily, but they're still going to get some of that, some of that pressure. So this is an area, like you said, Ohio State should win it. They have to win it. That's gonna, if they're sort of neutralized with the quick passing, I expect some of that. But at least with the quick passing, maybe that would take away some of the downfield stuff, and some of the one-on-one stuff with like Deshaun Hamilton in a slot, where I think they have a huge advantage, but maybe not an advantage on a 3-step drop.
All right. If you'd like to dig deep on Ohio State, Penn State analysis, hopefully we've provided much of that for you. But go to the Ozone.net and check out the work there by Tony and a number of contributors there. on a game week like this, of course, you got to dive in and check out all the X's and O's and all the matchups. I think from the entire calendar year, I like to jump on during the off season in particular as well, check out historical stuff and a lot of interesting angles on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Again, the Ozone.net with Tony Gerdeman and company. Tony, we appreciate the time. Great breakdown. I'm going to guess that you're going to have a prediction available there on the website.
Yeah, we will. We'll have our staff picks out tomorrow, sometime in the morning, and it should be I'm interested to see what everybody puts. You know, I don't look at anybody else's until I've got mine done, because I don't want to be influenced. But yeah, I already put mine in for Ohio State 31-24. It looks like the weather's going to hold off in terms of affecting the game, so I think that's going to. I don't ever want to see the weather decide an outcome, so let the best team win, and I'm looking forward to it.
Tony, if the bettors out there, they're not going to like you, because if they're trusting your analysis, you're pretty much right on that. I think it's about 6 right now. I've seen it at 7, so it's about right there.
If I had more faith in the Ohio State defense, maybe I can make it a 10 or a 14. But I've seen them get taken advantage of a little too many times this season.
All right, Ohio State, Penn State. The Buckeyes have blasted Penn State over the last several years at home. I think you've got to go back to the 2008 Terrell Pryor team that tied for the Big Ten title, went to the Fiesta Bowl and lost to a Rose Bowl-bound Penn State team, other than the Luke Fickell year. They lost 2011, a string of less than touchdown, one-score losses, and one of those, I think, like 27-24 to Penn State, 31-27, something in that range. All right, Tony Gerdeman from the Ozone.net. Please join him there for tremendous Ohio State football coverage. Tony, we appreciate the breakdown.
Thank you very much.